Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new park recreation series. It's been a while since we finished Dorney Park, and it's now time to start on the next big project. And in this project, we are going to be recreating Busch Gardens Williamsburg in Williamsburg, Virginia. This one was requested by a couple of people, but I've also been there a few times myself. I'm a big fan of this park. It's a lovely place to visit. If you live in the eastern US and you haven't been here, highly recommended. And I also thought it would make a pretty good RCT park. Busch Gardens has got a lot more going for it in the decoration department, I suppose you could say. It's won several awards for just being a beautiful park. And I think that would be fun to try to replicate in RCT. It has a lot more of that thematic aspect to it. I think it would be really fun to try in RCT. And just, yeah, build something that looks beautiful. It also has a pretty nice selection of roller coasters. 10 of them here, and I've ridden all of them except for Dark Coaster wasn't open the last time I went. And I think those are all pretty good candidates for RCT coasters as well. Nothing too crazy here as far as the build should go. Going to be, as usual, just a matter of getting the layouts as good as we can for the game and see how things go. So there are going to be a couple of caveats with this series compared to the previous two park builds I've done here for YouTube. So first of all, I'm doing this park for a contest. There is currently a contest going on the DKMP Discord server, the Park Recreation Contest. I saw that announced and I was like, well, I gotta do it. That's kind of my thing. And this would be a great candidate for it. But what that means is that by the time you're seeing this video, the contest is already over and the park is already done. So the contest started in March of 2024 and ends in September 2024. And I wanted to get the park done and out there ready to go before I started putting YouTube videos out there, just because I kind of like working on this sort of in secrecy. So feel free to leave comments if you've got comments, suggestions, whatever, criticism at all. As always, I love to read those, so feel free to leave them if you like. Unfortunately, I just won't be able to incorporate any of that into the finished park because, like I said, it's already done. The other caveat is that I did not actually record the time-lapse of the build like I do with my other two recreation series. So I built this one off camera completely, so you're not going to be able to see the build in progress as it goes. And the reason I did that was just because I wanted to make sure I could build it as well as I could. I've noticed in previous parks that when I build on camera, I tend to kind of rush things. They don't turn out quite as good as I would like them to, just because I'm building for the camera. And like I said, since this is for a contest, I wanted to make sure that the build was as good as it could be. That being said, I do have the work in progress save files for each session that I did during the build. So the way this is going to work is instead of showing the time lapse like I did previously, we're just going to go through a selection of those work in progress builds, show off where the park was at each of those points, give a little bit of commentary there, give some of my thoughts about where I was in the build. Hopefully it will turn out okay. I've never done this style of commentary before, but we'll see how it goes. All right, and here to start with, we have our very first save file where, like I did with Dorney, the first order of business is to get the coaster rough drafts finished in order to get a good sense of scale, what size the coasters are going to be like, and how we're going to piece them together into a final build. So I didn't build all the coasters in this park. I think I built all of them except Apollo's Chariot, because Apollo's Chariot is very much at the edge of the park. It goes along the border and the entrance road. Didn't really matter how big it was going to be or what shape it was because it doesn't really affect the park layout. One nice thing about Busch Gardens is that for the most part the coasters are all kind of around the edge of the park. I had a little bit more freedom in how I wanted the shapes of the coasters to be, and then I could kind of sculpt the paths around them and inside them, and it didn't really make a huge amount of difference compared to Dorney and especially Cedar Point. I guess with the exception of Loch Ness Monster, because it's kind of in the middle of the park. So I guess I'll go through each of these layouts, talk just a little bit about them. There's not really a whole lot to say yet, because like I said, these are rough drafts. Of course, the most important thing with Loch Ness Monster is you gotta get these interlocking loops. I believe there's only 2 coasters left in the world that still have them. With this rough draft build, I don't think that the interlocking actually works. It will once we get to the actual build. I'm gonna make sure that the dispatches are timed right so that they'll actually go through the loops on time. Yeah, this is definitely not going to work, especially not with block brakes not set up correctly. I guess I didn't put it in block brakes on on this build at all. There should be one here at the end of the station. All right, so we're not going to see that here. I will show off the interlocking loops later. Like all the coasters we're going to see here, they're a little bit tricky to fit into the grid. This one is probably one of the better ones. The section over here with the helixes inside the mountain and the second chain lift and the block brake, a little bit tricky to get in correctly because they're on the diagonal. Fortunately, we have the diagonal block brakes now to make this a lot simpler. But for an overall first draft, just want to make sure we get the heavy hitters in here. The first drop here, interlocking loops, kind of the centerpiece of the whole thing, and then tying that together with the second half of the layout. Pretty straightforward. We're going to obviously, like I always say, tweak these a whole lot as we build the official park, but that's what we're starting with. Moving along outside here, we got Grover's Alpine Express. This is the kiddie coaster over here. Pretty simple layout, a couple of little helixes, and you're back to the station. As with all kiddie coasters, as you probably saw if you watched the Dorney Park series, me playing with Woodstock Express, their kiddie coaster, the scaling on these is always a bit tricky with RCT because you have to build them a bit bigger compared to everything else than you would. Fortunately, Grover's Alpine Express isn't tiny like some kiddie coasters can be, so this one I think worked out pretty well, especially because this one is also kind of at the edge of the kiddie area of the park. So it should be pretty easy to squeeze everything around where it needs to go. We've got Invader, the modern Woody over here. This one was also pretty straightforward. A lot of diagonal track on this one, but I think it gives it a nice kind of organic, flowy look to it. Also, it's a lot shorter than I remember it being when I was building this one. Just kind of an out and back that kind of curves around on itself. Not a whole lot to this layout, but it is supposed to be sort of a smaller scale coaster, a little bit more on the family side or the thrill side than some other modern extreme Woodies. Next up over here we have Alpengeist, the park's B&M invert. This one is a huge pain to do in RCT. A lot of the track is on weird angles, not diagonals, not like 45-degree diagonals, but a lot of smaller angles that make it really tricky to figure out how to get the elements to fit into each other the proper way. I didn't spend a ton of time on this first draft because I knew I was going to basically redo the entire thing at least once or twice later. The most important thing I wanted to do with this draft is just get the length looking reasonable, so I knew how it would fit into the map compared to all the pathing and the other coasters. We're gonna do a pretty heavy rebuild of this coaster, especially the middle section. Pretty much everything between the Cobra roll and the Zero G roll over here, they get pretty heavily reprofiled to make them look a little bit cleaner and flow a little bit nicer. Because this looks terrible, and yeah, that's why we do first drafts though, because they're gonna look bad. But getting the sense of scale in here is really the important thing, and this is an important step. Griffin is another really tricky one, the dive coaster. It's got, if you look at it from a top-down view, it's got kind of a weird T shape or K shape to it, where all the bits are diagonal from each other. This layout here is horrendous. It's nowhere close to what we're gonna end up with in the final build. I don't even think the size of this is correct. The size or shape are both horrendous. Especially looking at how long it travels on. This is supposed to be like where the splashdown is near the end, but it's incredibly long, and then it goes in this gigantic turnaround, and then another huge bit before it goes back to station. This shape is completely not right. Fortunately, this is going to look a lot better once we get it into the park and fixed up along with everything else. Up here we have a rough draft of Pantheon, and this is a very rough draft. Again, just to get the size of this something reasonable. This one is an interesting coaster. We'll talk about it more later when we do the official build, but it's got a triple launch here in the middle of the coaster, which I just have I think a fast chain lift here to get over the top at. Doesn't really need to function correctly for this rough draft, but making this all look good in RCT this one is not as hard as I thought it was going to be. Making a couple of concessions on things like you can't do a stall, so we just have a regular 0G roll here. It would be nice if we could do a stall, maybe one day, but not for this build. But overall, pretty happy with the first draft of Pantheon. And then I think this is the last. No, we got a couple more. We got Dark Coaster over here. This is the newest coaster, the one I haven't ridden yet. It's an indoor coaster. Replaced the Dark Castle Dark Ride. Fortunately, I was able to find a good diagram of what this track looks like, because obviously POVs are all in the dark and you can't see anything, so Coasters like this are always pretty tricky to recreate. And this one is also pretty tricky because it has sort of a small scale. It's going to be inside of a building, and that really limits how you're going to be able to squeeze all the track together with the helixes, the curves, making sure these launches are at least sort of in the right place. But again, first draft, we'll tweak it more later. And the last coaster I have built today is Verbolten. Let's put this one in test mode for now. This is a really fun coaster. I enjoyed this one quite a lot on my last visit. This one also has a show building inside this section right here, and a drop track over here. Spoilers, there's a drop track here, which I did not put in this rough draft. I'm going to try to build it if there's room. Drop tracks are possible to do in RCT with some track hacking, merging to do a switchback to make the coaster fall down. It looks a little janky, but since this is inside of a building, maybe it'll look okay. My concern is that hopefully it'll have enough room because you need a certain amount of vertical space to do it. If it doesn't work out, then I guess we'll just have to keep this drop here, but I really want to get it with that vertical drop in there if I can pull it off, because I think that would be pretty cool. And I think that is, yeah, that's all of the coaster drafts we have for today. Like I said, didn't do one for Apollo's Chariot because it's a pretty standard out and back B&M Hyper, not a crazy layout at all. We're gonna be able to squeeze it in wherever we need to. I also didn't do a layout for Tempesto, the coaster next to Apollo's Chariot, the Premier Skyrocket, and that's because we don't really need to. That is a one tile wide coaster, basically. Really no concerns about making sure that goes where it needs to go. I don't need to build it here. We'll figure that one out later. So that is all the coasters accounted for. As far as other tracked rides go, there isn't a whole lot we have to take into account. They've got a train ride that goes around the outside of the park, so we can wait until the very last minute to put that in, make sure everything else is in there first. We have a sky ride to deal with, but that should be pretty simple. Don't need to worry about that one right now. I don't think off the top of my head there are any other major tracked rides that we'll need to worry about, which is pretty handy. So it should make our layout sketching a lot simpler than Dorney or Cedar Point were. In theory, I guess we'll find out as we get there. All right, I've just checked my ride inventory to double check. The only other tracked rides we would have to worry about are the splash boats, Escape from Pompeii. I know how to build those, how big those are going to be. Not really worried about putting those here. And the Roman Rapids, River Rapids ride. That one is also kind of at the edge of the park, so I don't think we'll need to worry about that one for now until we get to the Italy section and sketch that one in. Anyway, I think that's going to do it for this episode. I just kind of wanted to introduce the series, show off our rough drafts for the coasters. And next episode, we'll get to piecing together some park layouts and see if we can make those match up, figure out that piece of the puzzle. Looking forward to that a lot. But I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.